Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to do an unboxing and share some general impressions of The Last 100 Yards, Volume 2, which is the Airborne Over Europe edition. Now this is a 2020 game designed by Mike Denson and published by GMT Games. Let's jump right in and get started. So it's kind of a big picture as to where this game sits in the board game genres. This is, of course, a squad-level tactical game of combat in World War II, and of course, in the European theater in particular. And one thing to realize about this game is that it's the second game of three, at least at the moment, games in this series. The first was simply called The Last 100 Yards. This one is Airborne Over Europe, which adds an airborne element to some of the combat missions. And then the third one now that's in development is The Last 100 Yards, Solomon Islands. So there's at least 3 games in this, and I think Solomon Islands has just now gone over its P500 order status on the GMT website. So it will be a thing at some point in time. And if we take a look back here at the box, this is a 2-inch box, and it's kind of packed with stuff, probably coming in around 3 or 4 pounds here with stuff. And if we take a look kind of at some of the back elements here, again, it's a combat tactical level game, so we're looking at 50 yards per hex. The time scale is very interesting. One of the things the game is trying to do is to capture the chaos and unpredictability of small unit combat in World War II. So the time scale is kind of variable. Some turns are 2 minutes, as many as 2 minutes to 5 minutes, to kind of depict, if you would, that that combat, a lot can happen in 2 minutes, or that same amount of action could happen out over, say, 3 to 5 minutes in a game. So if we look at some of the basics here, we see that it's listed as a 1 to 2 player game. And I was curious as to how the the solo experience might be. So I did some kind of research on Board Game Geek, and the responses there were very favorable. A lot of players mentioned that they had to omit a mechanic or two, for example, like the hidden placement of troops, which doesn't really work very well in solitaire games. But other than that, the phasing that players are often wondered about, doesn't really become an issue, and there are a lot of favorable responses for a solitaire experience. So I'm excited to hear that. Of course, the game is designed for 2 players, with 1 player taking the German side and 1 player taking the American side. Now, it mentions 2 hours, and that feels about right. There's scenarios in here. It comes with 10 scenarios, and there's a design your own scenario element. Some of the earlier scenarios are relatively small, using only 1 map. Others are large, using as many as 6 maps with a lot more counters. So those would obviously take longer. I would say, kind of looking at it, I think the solitaire suitability, which it lists here as a 6, might actually be a 7. But in terms of the complexity, I spent about 2-3 hours with the rules. I brought them with me over vacation, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The game listed as a 6, but my initial impressions might be it's a little bit higher than that, but we'll talk about that as we dig in. And certainly I think those earlier scenarios might take you a little bit longer as you're learning the system. But let's open it up here and take a look and see what we've got inside. Now, the first thing to note is that, it comes with this update kit. And basically what they've done here is that they've added sturdier maps for all of the maps that originally came with the game, and then there's some replacement counters here as well. So let's take a look at the maps that come with the game. And one of the things I'm curious too, as I kind of play games like this and get into games like this, is how is the longevity of the system? Sorry for the crinkling there, might have been noisy, but how is the longevity of the system? And with 6 maps, and both of these maps, all of the maps are double-sided, so we've got quite a good set of possibilities in terms of mixing and matching these maps, combined with a design-your-own scenario experience. And these maps are just gorgeous. I mean, I love the greens and the browns. It just feels like Normandy and France, and just, it really captures the feel of kind of small unit combat in World War II. It's just such a beautiful color palette. Each hex now is about 1.25 inches across, and the main units in the game are about 1 inch large. So one of the things I do wonder, there are some, and this will come with, I'm sure we'll figure this out as we play the game, but I'm very curious about if the board becomes congested at all, because there are some very liberal stacking rules with the game, so we kind of just make our way through the maps here, in that you can have 3 squads, 2 machine guns, 2 vehicles, a towed gun, a fortified position, and 2 non-vehicle combat units in the same hex, which that'd be a pretty big pile here. And considering that you're marking units oftentimes with a die roll modifier in terms of how much damage is going to be influenced in terms of that combat resolution, and then marking with various factors that are going to be determined as you go through the rest of the turn with various units. It seems to me, I wonder about congestion. Now, I don't think there is because a lot of these scenarios are relatively small. And the second reason would probably be mortars. And basically, the idea, the rulebook mentions that mortars actually were the deadliest weapon in Normandy. And so I think if you're going to be stacking that many units together, you're going to pay the price. So I'm guessing that congestion isn't an issue. I'm curious if people have played the game as to what their experience would be. Let's dig into the rules a little bit, though. These are the series rules 1.1, and I think 1.2 is on the GMT website. Now, this is a little bit beat up. I took it to some 4th of July events and traveled for about 10 days with it in a backpack and different places. So it's gotten a little bit of wear and tear on it here. It's 36 pages is the main rule book, and it's divided up. I'll kind of show a couple of pages here. There's a lot of text per page. I mean, it's got quite a bit of information in here, and it's divided up by mechanic. So you're going to read, for example, a section on sequence of play or on terrain and sighting, and then actions and combat actions, maneuver. And there's a good amount of complexity here. I mean, if you look at, for example, here's 3 pages on maneuvering, and then assaults, where basically you're going to try to dislodge a group of units from a particular hex by moving into the same hex with them. Here's 2 pages really of information on assaults, and mortars have some complexity, 1.5 pages rules. I will say for it, so it feels like there's some heft here, and part of this might be the fact that I'm kind of getting back into historical gaming, so it might be a little bit more challenging for someone like me who's been playing now for a couple of months, and this would probably be the most challenging game that I would have dug into since coming back to historical games. So my rating for complexity might be a little bit higher than somebody else who's played a lot of games, and certainly nowhere near as complex as Advanced Squad Leader or the Lock and Load system. The thing I do like about the rules is that there's a lot of support for the learning. All the exceptions are noted, and there's different references to different parts of the rule book. I really like at the end here where they have an index, and this index references all the different actions. So if you're looking something up, there's a quick way to get to it, and you can bounce back and forth. I love the fact that everything's cross-referenced, and it's very well written. As I read through the rules and kind of wrap my head around, I'm like, yeah, this makes sense. It's logical, it's well explained, exceptions are listed and everything like that, and it's got a lot of clarity to how they're presenting the information, which I think in terms of for everything that's going on in the game, it makes it a lot easier to kind of wrap my head around. And after having spent a couple hours on the rule book now, I feel pretty comfortable that I can jump in and start playing once I finish the last third or so of them. Now, this is the second chunk of information that comes with the book. This is 36 pages, and this is the Airborne Over Europe playbook. This I found really helpful in terms of learning the game, because basically the first third of this second book are all kinds of examples. So for terrain here, as we can see, and I'll show some of these, some kind of close-up shots of these. For terrain, we can see they've presented a terrain map with all different keys on it, and then it will tell you which hexes can see which hexes and why. So I felt often as I was reading through the rules and things like that, I would refer to this. I'd kind of read that section on the rules and then come in here and read the example. That helped really clarify things for me. So I wasn't really struggling to pick stuff up, but just that there's a lot of edge cases and kind of a little bit of complexity to it. Then after you get through that initial phase that has the examples, they also have extended examples of play, which basically kind of go through a whole scenario, talking about what happens, movement. So rather than having a mechanic in isolation, they're blending all the mechanics together to show you how the sequences and rules work in the course of playing a game. I haven't read these yet, but they look really helpful in terms of helping to learn the game. So kudos on taking so much time to go into detail and analysis on how the game works. I feel like this has made learning the game both fun and relatively straightforward, considering that they're really trying to do something special here in terms of create some of the complexity of small arms combat in World War II. The back chunk of this playbook is filled with the designer's notes. And one of the interesting things you might say, okay, what are the designers trying to do to distinguish this series from something like Advanced Squad Leader or Lock and Load System or even Combat Commander? And the designer's really upfront about that. They're talking about the fact that they really want to try to recreate the ambiguous and chaotic nature of small unit combat in World War II. And the way they try to get at that is through an activation phase. So the player who has the activation rights for the first part of a turn will activate a part of their units, a number of their units, move those, maneuver those, and then call for a reaction from the other player. And then this activation, reaction, reaction goes back and forth until both sides pass. So you get kind of a more of an ebb and flow to combat where things are a little bit less predictable than if you had a straight turn sequence to things. So I'm looking forward to digging into that because I think it sounds like a very exciting system, and I know it's been well reviewed in the first game, so I'm really excited to give this one a try. Let's take a look at some of the units here now. These are gorgeous. I really like this. I think there's 5 sheets in all, and a few of them, again, come with replacement counters. So these here are the German units. I'll show you a close-up of these too. Lots of information on the counters. These main counters are all 1 inch by 1 inch. And you can see they're packed with a lot of different combat information that you'll need to be able to resolve battles and move them around the board. And we see here two-sided as well. There's a disrupted status to units, and that shows this other side for it there. Let's take a look at the Allied units. Here we have some American, mostly American infantry or airborne, and some armor, some British armor as well. And again, the same, just really like the graphical nature of these. These are really pretty to look at. It's a visual experience between the maps and the units. It's come a long way since when I wasn't playing about 20 or so years ago. Just really have come to appreciate how gorgeous these are and the tactile nature of this. Some more sheets, some armored units here for the game. And then this pack of, we've got 2 counter sheets that are basically, these facilitate the different types of combat actions. So as you're working through the various phases, you might have smoke. We got some mines here, some smoke. These are movement icons that you're going to put down on the board to basically help keep track of the combat and action that's going on as things go. And these 2 are two-sided. So here we have some wire, some improved positions and things like that, assault markers for different hexes. So a lot of aids to help kind of make things work. And this sheet here is the die roll modifiers. This is what you put on the hex as you've kind of fired into it, and the combat is resolved at the end after the activation phase has gone. So these are going to be what you use to temporarily track the impact of firepower on different hexes as you go forward. So what have we got next? Here are the scenarios, and I believe there are 10 in the game. We're getting ahead of ourselves. So 5 different sheets. Each one is two-sided, and I'll show one of these as a close-up here so you can take a look at it. They start with number 13, I believe it is here. Yeah, Bloody Ridge, which is a Bridge 10, which is a relatively simple one. The earlier ones, 13 here is a relatively straightforward one with only a number of units. I think it's obviously intended as a kind of a start here scenario, one of the easier ones. And then as we get up to number 22, I believe it is the last one, is Geronimo. We can see here that this is a 6 map one with a lot more units and a lot more kind of clarification on what's going on. But I really like the detail that's been put into these. And again, one of the things I ask as we kind of look at one of these games is what's its longevity? And you say, well, there's only 10 scenarios. But they've also spent a lot of time in a design your own scenario mode. So the rulebook has explanations for how to build your own scenarios. And with the 12 maps, and especially if you imagine combining this with the initial game, now you've got a lot more maps, so designing your own scenario becomes a great option for this that will really extend the play. And the last thing that I do look for in something like this is, I'm always curious as if there's some way that they try to connect scenario to scenario. And there really isn't, there is no campaign element to this game, but I did notice that they put in a role-playing element, which is kind of a bare-bones set of rules where you're going to try to take a leader and start them out as a sergeant, and then have them play all the way through to eventually becoming the company commander and hopefully keeping them alive while they accomplish that. So there's kind of a rudimentary role-playing element that you can add to the game to link some of these scenarios together. And I'm sure with a little bit of creativity, you could come in and could probably expand that and make it a little bit more complex. But I do think the game in itself has a lot of longevity to it. I'm really impressed with the attention to detail they've put in, and the aids for learning are just spectacular, as well as just a great visual experience. So I'm really excited to see how this one plays on the board here. A couple more things to look through and then we'll wrap it up here. This is a player aid card. Here an activation phase procedure, reaction, mandatory actions. And I did mention in particular some sections of the rules are fairly hefty. The assault procedures, there's a lot going on. It depends on whether you've got armored vehicles or you've got infantry, all kinds of things that are going on there. So it's really nice to see this further support. They do a good job supporting it as you're learning it, but they've obviously pulled these sections out. Mortar fire also seemed to be relatively complex in terms of execution. So these are obviously helpful aids that they put together to make things easier to learn. Another small touch that I really like is that they highlight or italicize or put in bold elements of the rules that they found were overlooked often in play testing. And so I found that really helpful as I was reading through things to be able to reference those and say, pay particular attention to those and making some notes and stuff like that. So again, a lot of attention to detail. I feel like this was a game that was heavily play tested and really well designed and really fine tuned, and especially in terms of supporting the learning experience, I'm really impressed. Here is the casualty track. So this obviously is a map aid that sits beside the maps as you go through. And again, time is relative, so turns can be anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, depending upon some randomization in there. And then a casualty track goes on. Then again, we've got another sequence of play. And this here is one-sided. So it just obviously sits beside the map, and you use that to support play. And then a very nice touch, we have 2 combat tables, so one for each player. And these have, I'll show a close-up here of the inside of one of these. We see the terrain effects table here, blind text. So a lot of different of the die roll checks and the information that you're going to be referencing quite a bit is again supported with 2 of these. So one for each player, which of course makes it a lot easier for players to wrap their heads around. And then in case you're wondering, we had those initial maps there that were a much thicker cardstock. These must have been the original ones that came with the game, and these are kind of thin, so I'm really glad that they did replace them with a thicker version, but they seem identical. I didn't see any typos on them, although I didn't go through them there, but we won't look at those because we saw the original maps. And then lastly, we have some dice, 4 10-sided die and 2 6-sided 4 10-sided dice and 2 6-sided dice that come with the game. So there you have it. That's the end of the box here. We've looked through everything. Really excited to give this one a try. It feels like a little bit of a stretch for me, just having kind of come back into wargaming, but I didn't want to go into advanced squad leader or lock and load yet. I'm just not quite ready for that mental investment and financial investment as well. And I haven't been able to find a version of Combat Commander Europe. I'd put this game set probably more in that category in terms of complexity, although probably for my sense is that this is a little bit more complex than the Combat Commander series. But it didn't feel overwhelming. I think with the support for learning in here, they've built a fairly complex and learnable system that looks like it creates great game experiences. So I am excited to dig in. If you've enjoyed this, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Just looking at my notes, I don't think there's anything that I have overlooked. Thank you again for tuning in. If you've enjoyed it, thumbs up is a great help in terms of getting this video in front of other people. And if you've enjoyed it and you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Thanks so much for tuning in. And if you've played the game, I'd be interested to hear how you found it. Was it fun? What'd you like about it? You have had a good time with it and things like that. So let me know down in the comments below. Thanks for watching and have a great day.